Kirsty Mackie, and she's giving us a presentation on elder abuse, is late life domestic violence. Kirsty holds a Bachelor of Arts in Asian Languages and Southeast Asian History from the University of New South Wales and a Bachelor of Laws Honours from Queensland University of Technology. Kirsty's legal background is in family law, and she commenced at Caxton Legal Centre, a community legal centre at Caxton's first family law duty lawyer in the Federal Circuit Court, Brisbane, formerly the Federal Magistrates Court. After 3 years of frontline court work, Kirsty accepted a role as a coordinating solicitor at Caxton Seniors Legal and Support Services. During this time, Kirsty ran the outreach service for seniors at the Suncoast Community Legal Centre at Maroochydore. Oh, that's where I'm from. Oh. In September 2015, Kirsty commenced her own consultancy called KRM Legal, working solely in the area of elder abuse awareness. Kirsty also coordinates the University of the Sunshine Coast Law School's clinical placement program in collaboration with the Suncoast Community Legal Centre. Since 2014, Kirsty has been the chair of the Elder Law Committee at the Queensland Law Society and is actively involved in the law reform in the elder law and elder abuse awareness. Welcome, Kirsty.
Thank you. As you can see, I'm a captive and I'm not going anywhere. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Elder abuse probably sits where domestic violence was about 25 years ago. So it's a primarily family issue, it's behind closed doors, and it's there's very little understanding within the community. There's no legislation, there's no adult protective legislation in Australia. America and a lot of the other countries, Canada in particular, are very well advanced with adult protective legislation, but we've yet to make it. As you're probably aware or not, the Australian Law Reform Commission has just commenced an inquiry into elder abuse, and report's due in May. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's probably on a federal level the most that we've seen. In my role at the Law Society, I spend a lot of my time harassing politicians and they're just not interested. It's not a sexy issue, it's really hard to engage them with. We're thankful that with the discussion on domestic violence recently, elder abuse has been added in. So Dame Quentin Bryce produced a report 2 years ago called Not Now, Not Ever, and it's really been the start of a lot of legislative change in Queensland in relation to domestic violence, but particularly there's been some really important changes with elder law and elder abuse. So, as you know, I'm from Queensland. This is my winter outfit and I'm freezing. So I'm looking to be shivering or shaking, I'm not nervous, I'm really cold. It was 25 when I left this morning, and so, you know, everywhere's 25. So my nose is running, I'm a real treat, so please excuse me. This was a really good statement made in October 2011 from the South Australian Office of the Public Advocate. It was quite long and I thought I'll just take a few lines, but it really sums up, and it's very similar to domestic violence, is that the abuse and neglect of older people is everyone's business. The challenge is to create a community which does not tolerate a culture of abuse and neglect. On an international perspective, there's a UN Convention on the Rights of the Children, Women, the disabled and the elderly is probably the only minority group that's not covered. Until that happens, we won't be getting any adult protective legislation anytime soon. So it's really on a state-by-state basis that this issue needs to be addressed, and it's more also on raising awareness on what it is. So the very kind intro said that I have my own firm and I work for myself. Work is a very loose term. Probably 90% of the work I do for clients is pro bono. I pay my bills with the Community Legal Centre work in the university. So all of the case studies, obviously because everyone's had their money removed from them by their children, so they don't have any money, but it's something that I'm quite passionate about and I'll keep doing it. What is elder abuse? In 2002, the World Health Organisation did define it as a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there is an expectation of trust which causes harm or distress to an older person. It's pretty much a uniform definition that's been agreed throughout the world. I have a few statistics. They're not half as fancy as Chris's statistics, but before we'll do that, we'll talk about the types of elder abuse. I mean, you can see similarities. That's domestic violence, just in an older context. But the interesting thing is, once you reach over 65, the physical stops and the financial and the psychological starts. So the most popular, for want of a better word, is financial abuse. With about 42% of perpetrators, victims reporting financial abuse, and psychological abuse is about 36%. So in terms of substance abuse is something that we're seeing quite a lot, and that doesn't mean that the perpetrator or the victim takes drugs. It means a misuse or under prescription, over prescription, overuse of prescription drugs. I had a client who was oxygen dependent, and the son would withhold that oxygen until she handed over her cash card. So that's substance abuse. And then I had another client. I have no cheery stories, I'll just let you know now. I had another client who had a 24-hour carer and was also taking water tablets. The carer refused to give her the water tablets at night because she didn't want to take her to the toilet at night. So then, of course, that results in urinary tract infections and so on and so forth. So it's this in-house carer who's perpetrating this substance abuse. Neglect is also something, unfortunately, from last year's numbers to this year's numbers has doubled, because people are being encouraged by the government to age in place. So don't go into a home, age in your own home, which normally means either a paid carer or a family member. And this is why we're seeing such a spike in the types of abuse. Just a couple of statistics. It's actually higher than between 2 and 10% of Australians aged over the age of 65 report some form of elder abuse. 90% is perpetrated by known persons. Now, these numbers are slightly out. Just before I left yesterday, the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit in Queensland very kindly gave me their 2016 report. So let me just check the notes. They're only slightly different. So sons and daughters are now level pegging as perpetrators. So 36% of sons and 36% of daughters. So there's a 50-50 perpetrator split now, which is pretty interesting. So 73% of people have a parent-child relationship. The perpetrators are aged between 50 and 54 years, and the majority of victims are female, aged 80 to 84. Now that mainly is due to longevity. Women generally live longer than men, so there's more women around and there's more abuse of women. Unfortunately, a statistic that we are seeing is grandchildren are becoming increasingly likely to perpetrate the elder abuse. Paid carers, not so much, but that's an area that is increasing as well. I won't go through that, but just to see, I mean, there is a bit of a flip in comparison to domestic violence. So the physical is very low, the social, sexual is also very low. Just a comment on social abuse. One of the speakers earlier mentioned, I think it was Chris, saying the partner had taken his partner out to Broken Hill to completely isolate her. A lot of the perpetrators socially isolate the older person so they can, take all their money without being monitored. There's a really interesting comment that was made in relation to social abuse, in that the absence of a supportive relationship is equal to the health effects of smoking 15 cigarettes a day or consuming 6 alcoholic drinks. It's more harmful than not exercising and twice as harmful as obesity. And it's estimated about 20% of older Australians are socially isolated. So it's when you hear in the news that an elderly gentleman was found in his apartment and he'd been dead for 3 weeks, or an older lady had been found in her house and she'd passed away 4 months ago. It's that sort of social isolation that's happening as we are more, you can blame it on anything. I blame it on the lack of sense of family. It's becoming less and less, and also the rise in people having relationships via technology, and people are getting left behind, and those people are the older people. Risk factors. Obviously, once you get to the age of 84, probably a quarter, and this is just a Queensland statistic, about a quarter of people aged over the age of 84 have some form of dementia. So probably a quarter of the people who ring in and report elder abuse have some form of dementia. So in that regard, you've got family members, neighbours, concerned friends ringing up, reporting the elder abuse. Social isolation, in particular, as I said, 80 to 84, the likelihood that they've lost their partner is pretty high. Mental health addictions of the perpetrator is also unfortunately very common. The generation factor of women of the age of 80 to 84, a lot of them are financially unaware. The gender relationships that have been played in their marriage primarily have been the husband goes out to work and the wife stays home and looks after the children. I'm making a very broad generalisation here, so don't shoot me. There's also some cultural issues as well. I've had a lot of clients from non-English speaking backgrounds who have a very traditional view of what the role of the husband is, which is then replaced by the son. So you've had the husband who may be in control of the finances, and then the husband passes away and the son takes over, because that's just what happens. And I've had daughters come to me of non-English speaking clients and say, he's hopeless, he's never had a job, but why is he looking after mum's money? And mum insists, it's because what your father wanted. It's quite difficult to work with the cultural issues. Typical scenarios, as I said, I've got something really exciting there. So hold your horses. So financial abuse takes many forms. The most popular is misuse of powers of attorney, and then there's forced changes of wills, there's granny flat issues, moving in with family. It's my favourite, getting rid of Rodney. Apologies to any Rodneys here, it was just a client we had and we couldn't get rid of him. So they come to stay, they have a family breakdown, bankruptcy, something, and they come and stay with mum or dad. It's only for 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, 3 months later, or 3 years later, they're still there. I had one particular client whose son had a fixation with fish, and he had enormous tropical fish tanks, and the older gentleman came in and saw me, and he had an electricity bill for about $3,000 a quarter because of this fish thing. These people are just living on pensions, and they can't afford it, but they love their son, and they're in a really tricky spot. Controlling access to finance. What the statistics are starting to show, which is unfortunate, is probably almost half of the perpetrators living with the victim are in receipt of some form of carer's pension. We've tried to take this up with Centrelink, but if anyone's tried to deal with Centrelink, you probably know the answer to that. It's very difficult. So they get the carer's pension, they give no care, and then they also tick that nominee box, which I can't stand, on the Centrelink, in that the pension goes straight into the perpetrator's account. And there's no protection, and you ring up Centrelink and you say, this person is doing this and misusing the funds. Oh, well, they've ticked the nominee, and my client, or the concerned friend, my client has lost capacity. So I can't get my client on the phone to tell Centrelink that it's a nightmare, and it's really hard to manage. Guarantees loans, mortgages signed under duress, that's a real big one. Back to the exciting bit. 2015, $10 million was misappropriated in Queensland by 139 attorneys. when I got the new report yesterday, I went, oh, righto, and I checked the old report, and it's now 281 million last year was misappropriated by 89. So they're getting better at it, and there's less of them. And I don't know whether that means property prices have gone mad, but I was astounded, and I did have to triple check it and then ring them and say, you sure you've got this right? So that's the most popular thing to do. The difficulty is there's no harmonisation of powers of attorney and guardianship legislation throughout Australia. It's a real mix mash, and considering the COAG just agreed on a definition of a free-range egg after about 10 years of discussion, I don't hold out much hope for harmonisation of powers of attorney. But we've got a definition for free-range eggs, so yay for us. Barriers to reporting. You will again see some similarities to domestic violence. The particular situation with elder abuse is that they live with the perpetrator. They rely on the perpetrator for care. So there's a very, very much so a codependent relationship. I get so many people come to me and they're fearful of being put into aged care. And if anyone's been into some of the aged care facilities, you'd be fearful of it too. They're pretty ordinary. Love of the abuser, the dependents, some of the community workers that do come in, the in-home carers, with all their best intentions, don't quite understand what's going on. And if there's some capacity issues with the client, then the son comes in, he's very convincing, oh, mum's just got dementia, don't worry about it. No, she's making it up. She's always done that. And so it's a confusing time. There's a lack of information available to the victim. As I said, we're in the position that domestic violence was about 25 years ago, despite it first being recognised elder abuse in 1975 in the UK. So it's been around as long as I have. Now I've just told you my age. Recognising the signs. Sudden change of will or EPOA to new friend. Going back to social isolation, a lot of these older people, their children have moved away, their spouse has passed away. I've had clients come to me with an enduring power of attorney signed over to Jim's mowing man who comes round, or the pool man is a popular one too, because the pool man comes around once a week or once a fortnight, and the mowing man comes around once a fortnight. So it's a reliable person. They strike up a relationship. I'm not saying anything wrong that there's. Anyway, it's just risky, and people do not have enough choice or understand their options when it comes to powers of attorney. And there are some awful people out there, I'm afraid, and just waiting to take advantage. So that's a real sign that something does need a few questions asked. Transfer of property for no payment. This is in particular in relation to the granny flat issue. So we don't want to go into aged care because they want to charge, take a $400,000 bond. So I'll sell my house. No, I'll get mum to sell her house. She can give me the $500,000. I'll stick it in the mortgage. She can live in the spare room and just be great. Or transfer the property. We'll all move in with you, me and my 12 children. And then when the relationship breaks down, what have you got? I've had homeless 92 she was, and she was homeless. She'd sold a house, she'd moved in with the daughter. Daughter had done some renovations. She wasn't on the title, there was no contract, there was no agreement, there was nothing. She'd given her $350,000, her life savings, and she was 92, and she was homeless. And it's really hard to find temporary accommodation for a 92-year-old. We eventually sorted the daughter out, but it took 12 months. Not in a, there's a lot of police officers. There's nothing like that. I can hear you. I'm a lawyer, I can be trusted. They do. J.B. Peterson taught us a lot. Sudden difficulty in paying bills, demonstrated anxiety around family members, unexplained bruising, as I talked about earlier, passed off as dementia related, and that's social isolation. So I go and talk to a lot of community groups and at aged care facilities and groups that come together and for a social activity, and I encourage them. It's not so much being a nosy neighbour, but if Doris isn't at the View Club meeting 3 times in a row, can someone give her a ring? Can someone just check up on her? Can we reinvigorate that sense of community? Because it's that sense of community, that loss of it, which is leading to the isolation of these older people. So if there's withdrawal from previously enjoyed activities, go around, give her a ring, and if not, we'll give someone a call to express. We've had police do welfare checks on the older person, and unfortunately, have come across some fairly ordinary situations. So it's more so just to be alert and alarmed. Capacity is something, as I talked about earlier, declines over age. We've all got that to look forward to. I think I'm already there. There's 3 elements of capacity, and I'm speaking from a QCAT perspective, which is our Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, or our Guardianship Tribunal. So in the Powers of Attorney Act and the Guardianship Act, you've got to satisfy these 3 elements. Understanding nature and effect, able to freely and voluntarily make decisions, and ability to communicate the decisions in some way. In the past, they've wanted that to be a tick 3 box type situation. But what we're seeing now is a couple of cases are coming out where they're not so much focused on having to tick all 3 boxes. And there's a case I'll talk about later, which is a good internet fraud case of an old 71-year-old lady who handed away millions to an internet romance scam. And I think Queensland is the most scammed state in Australia. So something to be proud of. Incapacity. I think this really sums it up, because capacity fluctuates, and I thought this was quite an accurate way of describing it, that there's no possibility of mistaking midnight from noon, but at what precise moment twilight becomes darkness is hard to determine. I mean, we've all done it. We're all out there watching the sunset and we go, oh, isn't that lovely? And all of a sudden it's dark. And you think, well, when did that happen? Capacity is exactly like that. It's just a slow decline, and then it can go up and it can go down. So you've got to be really aware of that if you're dealing with older people who are reporting concerns, reporting some form of abuse, that you don't just discard them. The ageism, unfortunately, in society is getting worse. So we all think old people are painful, they're slow, pension day at the supermarket is a nightmare because they're just so slow. It's that sort of attitude, but there are capacity fluctuations, and they are affected by a number of things. I had a client who was prone to suffering urinary tract infections, and I'm not sure whether there's any medical people here, but when you present with a urinary tract infection, you present with the same sort of signs as you might have dementia or some capacity issues. So she was prone to that. She had an attorney. She sort of trusted and she sort of didn't. Anyway, she had a hospital admission after a UTI, and the attorney told her that she was going to be putting her into a safer place. That safer place turned out to be a locked dementia ward. And for some reason, they left her with her laptop and her mobile phone. So she's in there in the locked dementia ward Googling things, and finds a number for when I was at the community legal centre called Caxton at the senior service. So she rings us. We go and try and see her. The attorney doesn't permit us to see her. We try and get some medical records to prove some form of capacity impairment. Attorney wouldn't let us have them. We made an application to QCAT to try and get a declaration of capacity. 7 months it took us. We'd get we'd get a medical report, she'd get one. And it was like medical reports at dawn. It was counted by this, and she'd go to another doctor. By the end, it took 12 months to get her out of the facility. And by the end of it, the tribunal member said to us, Madam, you must be one of the most tested persons I've ever had the pleasure to, determine that you have capacity. She had 12 months of just being dragged in and dragged out. Anyway, we got her out, busted her out, because it is Queensland, and she got home, and one of the social workers drove her home, and her house was up for sale. So we just got there in time, and the attorney had the house up for sale, which is another thing. Attorneys can register the document at the Land Titles Office and they can sell your house. So, you know, it's a pretty big deal. You know, and I could go on, and I do, according to my husband, so I won't. Elder abuse, is it a form of domestic violence? There's really strident people in the elder abuse sector who just say no. It's not related, not connected, but the longer I'm in it, I'm not so strident. Yes, DV is motivated by control, elder abuse is motivated by greed, but also a level of control. You don't socially isolate someone you don't want to control. You know, you just can't differentiate it. This year with the new statistics, they've started to look at trauma history and DV history of the perpetrator and of the victim. And it's quite telling. So about 11% of perpetrators have some trauma history. So they've seen it in their family members, they've seen dad behaving like that to mum, or they've been abused by dad, and then they've gone on to abuse mum. And mums, probably 5% of victims are reporting some form of DV history as well. So it's something I'd like to look into in my spare time and, you know, make some sort of determination, because there's a definite link. However, saying that, there was a case in South Australia which didn't follow the risk factors, no ticking of boxes, no capacity issues. She was, I don't think I've got the facts up, so I'll have to be boring and read them out. She was a 83-year-old woman. She lived in her own home. She was independent, intelligent, active for her age and in reasonably good health. She was a private person, but she travelled frequently on day trips and for longer holidays. She had the Red Cross ring her, did their silver cord thing. She, unbeknownst to anyone, had been harassed for months prior to her death by a woman who'd moved in a couple of doors down, a young woman. On the 4th of December in 2008, she failed to answer the scheduled Red Cross call. And 3 months later, her dismembered body was found in a creek, murdered by a 35-year-old mother of two who had planned to profit from the sale of her home. Although living alone, there's little to suggest that Von McGlynn, which is the name of the lady, was particularly vulnerable to abuse. She was the unsuspecting victim of a calculated criminal with whom she did not have a relationship of trust or dependence, although it was the initial intention of her attacker to develop such a relationship as her carer. So you've got a woman, fairly wealthy, someone comes, that's my concern with the Jim's lawn mowing thing. So I always look at it glass half empty or glass completely empty. So there are things that don't tick the boxes of your classic elder abuse scenario, which is always important to remember. I've done a couple of DV matters for older people, and they're just particularly nasty. And picking up on a point from one of the earlier speakers about violence to animals, as soon as there's violence to an animal, they pick up the phone. They can be abused and beaten and neglected and wills changed, not allowed to use the washing machine. He had to carry around his own plastic chair because he wasn't allowed to sit on the couch because he was incontinent. It was his house. Then he got punched in the nose, and then they started to kick his dog. And when they started to kick his dog, he gave us a call. We got it, the son and the daughter-in-law filed cross applications, which was interesting. And then the wife, who they'd managed to alienate from the husband, also filed a cross application. She had no capacity, and it was awful in the trial when the magistrates very kindly speaking to her. She didn't know the day it was, she didn't know what time it was, she didn't know why she was there. And the magistrate said to her, you know, what would you like? And she said, I just want to go home with my husband. And it was just tragic that this son and daughter had manipulated the whole situation. Anyway, we got them out and had a 2-year order against them. But last time I heard, Oh dear, was that 10 minutes? Okay. Last time I heard they were putting in an equitable claim on the house because they claimed they had, made significant contributions, but they had to go off to a private solicitor because those sort of equitable actions are in the Supreme Court, way too complicated for me, and extremely expensive to run, which is another reason why people don't chase after the money that they lose, because it ends up in the Supreme Court and it's extremely expensive. I won't keep carrying on, but she was a lovely lady, really lovely lady. She was a truck driver's wife and she'd run the business for her husband for years. She was really smart. They'd bought her own house. She still had the title for in 1972 when she paid off the house. When she was 82, she was suffering from cancer. The daughter-in-law picked her up from the hospital, took her to the bank, took her to the solicitor's office. By the end of the day, she'd signed over half of the house and signed a mortgage for the full value of the house. She signed it over to a grandson because the son was bankrupt. The son had people from the Gold Coast loan sharks, it's the Gold Coast, chasing after him for a truck debt. And they were getting quite violent and physical, and she was trying to protect him, and she thought it'd only be 12 months. $200,000 later, he just gave all the money to the bikies or whoever they were, and then nicked off. He didn't pay any mortgage repayments. She had the sheriff's office around on her doorstep after about 12 months. And she rang us up and we went out because we used to work in tandem with social workers. So the social worker and I went out and saw her, and she just presented us with bag after bag after bag, shopping bag of bank statements. So it took us some time to go through it, and it just turned out it was a nightmare. The bank had signed her up. They didn't even check. She was a pensioner, and they gave her a $200,000 mortgage, and the son was unemployed. There was no due diligence. She was not offered any independent legal advice. They couldn't even point to where she'd signed the form. It was just appalling. It was a major Big Four bank. So I wrote to them and explained the situation, thinking, oh, this will be quite straightforward. You've clearly done the wrong thing. I got a nick-off letter from them back. So went to the Financial Ombudsman Service, which is a free service and very, very good. And eventually, after 12 months of going back and forth and to and fro, I get a call from the customer experience officer. And he was so pleased and excited to talk to me. And I realised why, because he was releasing the whole mortgage. They didn't want to take it to a hearing. They just obviously saw it was a complete F up. And they just released, and by that time we were looking at about $230,000 and the house was only worth $200,000. So there's multiple types of financial abuse and they're getting better. Because I don't have much time, I'll just quickly whiz through the internet dating thing. She was 71, widowed in 2009. She was left millions and millions of dollars by her husband. By about 2013, she'd sold a home, was asking friends for loans and had approached the bank for a personal loan. She'd met this US scammer on the internet. They were engaged, even though she had to buy her own engagement ring. He was promising he'd come out. He promised to pay her back. Oh, she was in his will, and that's how he was going to pay her back. She handed over a couple of $1 million. Queensland Police got involved. They got the FBI involved. They interviewed this guy. He was long criminal history. She was told all of this. All the doctors said she was in a full mind, sound mind, no capacity issues. One GP made a slight comment that she had some difficulty with reality and fantasy. She couldn't quite tell the difference. Anyway, so it was effectively a woman with full capacity, and she believed everything. He had about, do I have that there? I think he had about 9 heart operations in 12 months. And she kept giving him the 50 grand and another 50 grand. Oh, I'm having another heart operation. Oh, the mafia are after me. I can't leave. I've got 37% interest to pay. I'm going to be shot by the mafia if I leave. That's why I can't come out. And just on and on and on. Her son finally took it to QCAT to try and get an order that he be the financial administrator. which is really unusual because the jurisdiction, you have to have no capacity to get to QCAT. So he got it in. He was obviously did very well. And the determination was that she didn't make, if we remind ourselves as to those three elements of capacity, one of them's freely and voluntarily. Her will was so overborne by this man that there was no freely and voluntarily. She was just completely under his spell. So an order was made that the son be her financial guardian. I mean, there's good and bad things about that. It's a self-protective measure, but you know, how far do we go? How many, can we make our own mistakes? Do we need someone to step in and look after us? You know, it's that self-autonomy versus, you know, the right to make your own mistakes, to that overprotective element. So there's a real, the QCAT are very reluctant to step in that regard, but that was such an extreme case that they did decide to do that. Just to end up, there's no mandatory reporting. No one's obliged to report any suspicions of elder abuse. If you suspect it, there's actually no one to ring. You can ring a lawyer and they'll say, oh, it's a bit tricky. You can ring the police. If it doesn't fall under the DV legislation, there's not much they can do. The fraud, you know, Queensland police are extremely busy, as I'm sure New South Wales police, all police are. And the fraud squad generally won't pick it up unless it's over a couple of $100,000, and it usually is about 50 to 60,000. And it's really hard to engage anyone to assist. Aged Care Act imposes some mandatory reporting of staff. So if you suspect some staff are physically abusing, then you can dob them in, but only government-funded facilities. So the private facilities, you've got Buckley's. There is a big debate going on about mandatory reporting, saying undermines the right to self-determination and autonomy, best used for prevention and awareness. So it is with great interest that I'm looking forward to the report of the Australian Law Reform Commission about the elder abuse study that is coming out in May, because constitutionally the Commonwealth actually doesn't have power to make any legislation, so it's going to be a bit creative what they're planning on doing. But I'm pleased that they're doing something. Oh, that's me. I've got these top 10 tips that I give out to my clients, and they may seem like I'm telling you how to suck eggs, but it's just so basic. But this is what I must tell people 20 times a day. Don't give your PIN out. Don't give your cash card out. Banking online is a nightmare, absolute nightmare, and that's where a lot of money goes. Independent legal advice, I'm not going to read them all. Talk to Centrelink and make your will, enduring power of attorney, appoint more than one attorney. Join a group, speak up, ring me, I'm free, I would say. And, you know, keep your eyes open because it is happening and unfortunately it is increasing. So once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm sorry about my dripping nose and my shaking hands. I will warm up probably when I get home, but thank you again. I can't leave, I'm tied to the desk, so.
All right, release those shackles.
What offences would come under if we suspected that our clients were abusing their parents as what would commonly happen? You said the police don't have any jurisdiction over that?
I mean, it depends on what sort of offence that you see that they're doing, and if it doesn't fall under domestic violence legislation, I mean, a lot of it is theft, but the monies just don't add up to be sufficient to pursue an investigation and criminal charges, and also you've got unwilling victims willing to pursue with the complaint. If they don't have capacity, then you can report it to the public guardian, the adult guardian, they can step in, but generally only if there's a power of attorney in place. there's very little legal remedy. Sometimes it's fraud, that transfer of the house, and that was undue influence, which is equity, which you're in that Supreme Court issue. So the problem is there's an old legal ideal of between son and parent and child, there's a presumption that that's a gift. And you've got to rebut that by saying, oh, but there was undue influence. It's almost impossible to do that with a client with declining capacity. So the US has special prosecutors and elder abuse sections, and they do just elder abuse, and they are on top of it 100%. So it will require a lot of legislative amendment and awareness of everyone understanding what it is, but there's very little, unfortunately, that can be done.
Yeah, one question. It says here that you non-profit organisations sort of involved. Have we got something similar to that in New South Wales that we can as interventions or something like that?
I mean, that's not so much an intervention, that's just a program. It was a one-off pilot, it's not running anymore. I'm not involved with it anymore. But it was just getting older people out of their homes and engaging with children doing reading in schools. There have been programs relying on that one-off funding, but just getting that continuous funding, you'll find that these things just don't continue, unfortunately. So I'm not aware of another New South Wales equivalent. Kirsty.
On behalf of the car, I'd like to thank you for coming all the way down to Canberra and freezing your butt off with us fellow Queenslanders. It's very cold down here.
Thank you very much.